Hi everyone, I'm your host Susan Telford, and with me today is my good friend Diederik Wolsak. Welcome Diederik, it's always lovely to be with you. I so look forward to our conversations.
Thank you, Susan. We seem to continue to have fun year after year and
We do.
do some wonderfully productive work together. I love it.
Great. So you are going to be giving a workshop for us on the 13th of February. And the title of that workshop is Who Would You Be Without Your Story? And I have to say that the title that Diederik first proposed was, Are you tired yet of believing your own bullshit? Which I have to say I did like, but I had my kind of social media hat on.
I like it too because it's pretty direct, and we, as you know, I tend to be a little direct on occasion. But on the other hand, it might be offensive to some people, and I've never been adverse to that either. But it's probably not. So let's go with who would you be without your story?
Yeah. So there may be some people listening who are not aware of you and your work. So I suppose the first question that I would like to ask you is, what was your story and how did that lead you to doing the work that you have spent many, many years doing?
What a great question. And I should have expected this question, but I didn't. My story was, I spent the first 3.5 years of my life in a concentration camp. Then I spent the next 3 years in Indonesia in a war-torn zone. Then I was sent to foster care in Holland for 2 years. And by that time, I was one ball of anger, rage, fury, depression, etc. And the story, of course, is I had a horrible childhood. This was all done to me. I'm a victim. And I can tell you how I'm a victim, and I can convince you of the fact that I'm a victim in no time. And then you'll feel sorry for me, and I will misinterpret that as love. And so my story, if let's maybe go back a little bit to the essence of our work. And the essence of our work is really simple. It's this. As a little person, say from the age of 0 to 8, things happen around you. Your mom or your dad say things, there happens things in your environment, and each of those events is interpreted by the small person as meaning something about them. And so that means that every interpretation that I make of an event in those early years solidifies into a core belief. That core belief will then continue to run the show till I wake up and say, this is not working for me. And of course, when I first started doing my work, I didn't know why it wasn't working for me because I had no idea that who I thought I was had absolutely nothing to do with who I was. And so who I thought I was guilty beyond words for all the suffering I'd seen in the camps and all the deaths and torture that I've seen and witnessed. I was guilty for my mother suffering because she stayed alive in order to keep me and my brother alive. And she really wanted to die. It was miserable. I was guilty for really whatever you can imagine. And why is that different from you? Thank God it isn't. It's the same as your story. And I want to make that so clear because sometimes people say, well, I had a really easy childhood. I don't know why I have all these negative core beliefs. And the answer to that is none of us had an easy childhood. None of us did. In everybody's life, there's a moment, and the Course calls that really interestingly a moment when the time of terror takes the place of love. That is the moment, of course, the Course is alluding to the moment that I think I'm separate, but in the work we do, I don't quite go to separation yet. I go first to all the beliefs. So I learned fairly recently that in the camps, if a little boy or girl misbehaved, the mother was beaten. And I never realized that before. Now, I have no way of knowing, excuse me, whether my mother was beaten or not. But when I read that, I thought, wow, what are the chances that a 3-year-old boy misbehaved? They're pretty good. So what are the chances that my behavior caused my mother suffering? Now that is ego thinking. Mm-hmm. Because of course, in truth, whatever I do or somebody else does cannot cause suffering for anybody. That suffering is a mistaken idea. I can elect to heal all thoughts that hurt. So the thoughts are what causes my pain, and the thoughts are chosen by what you can call my story. So my story is a collection of evidence that my ego has collected based on my core beliefs. And like anybody else, my ego is incredibly efficient in finding evidence. It will find it wherever it looks. And the more evidence I find, of course, the stronger my core beliefs are, the more difficult it is to say, wow, where is this coming from? I have no idea. For example, one of the many diagnoses I walked out of that environment with was borderline personality disorder, which is a really, really nasty disorder. I had no idea. I had no idea. Till 3 years ago, my first wife was at the center in Costa Rica, and we started talking about, we go back to 68, 69, so it's a long time ago. And we started talking about our relationship and what was wrong with it. And I, having done my work, recognized that 100% of the issues in my relationships were my fault. I have no problem with that at all. And then she explained that we had gone to see a psychiatrist together, and he had been rather dismissive of us as a relationship. She went back to him by herself, and he told her, this guy's borderline personality, you better get out of the relationship because that will never change. But I didn't know that. And since then...
You didn't know that you had borderline personality disorder?
I had absolutely no idea. I do know, looking back, because since then, since that information came in, and it hit me a little bit because I know borderline personality disorder people, they're not fun. They're not fun people. So when my ex said that, I thought, God, I'm going to have to take a look at that and maybe talk to some other people who knew me at that time. So I sat down with my brother, and he said, I love you. You're my brother, and I will always love you and support you. And there was a time that nobody could stand being around you because you were literally toxic. That is my story. So whatever I present to the world is the result of my story. Now, if I want to keep telling my story, I can give you all the reasons why and the evidence that I have to support and actually prop up and solidify my story till I get to the point that I say, who cares? Yeah, these things happen. Absolutely. I learned something incredibly exciting a long time ago. It was in 1988. The first workshop I ever took with an organization called The Pursuit of Excellence. It was an amazing workshop. I'd never done a workshop, so I was amazed. But one of the things I learned is, Susan, when you die, on your stone, it will say, here lies Susan Telford. She had a rich and full life, or all the reasons why not. And all the reasons why not is what I was living. Till age 50, by that time I was an absolute drunk, I was a drug addict, I was a philanderer, I sabotaged any form of success because I have some talent.
You'd had quite a lot of success in your life, though, hadn't you? I mean, you had to...
That was the problem. See, the problem, I was cursed with a reasonable amount of intelligence and a reasonable amount of talent. So seemingly, to the world, I could look successful. But I always sabotaged it. Yeah. For example, I had 2 restaurants. Both were in Gourmet magazine. Both were absolutely excellent restaurants. And I drank them both dry. And that's what you do when you have a negative core belief that says you don't deserve joy, you don't deserve love, you don't deserve to live a rich, full life. And then you're going to find the ways to make that true. And that's the problem with the story. The story will demand consistency and congruency. And to break that, to break the story and say, no, that cannot be who I am. Because I started doing the course, of course, which I did for 12 or 13 hours a day for a whole year. I learned right away.
For 12 or 13 hours a day?
I had no choice. I knew that if I didn't completely transform my mind, I would kill myself because I was so profoundly miserable. And the results, of course, I've memorized the course, I can tell you. At least I could before I became 80.
So we're talking about A Course in Miracles, just in case people are not aware of what the course means. How did you come across it? How did that come across your path?
Well, that's a great question. Somebody, 2 years when I was 48, a friend of mine gave me the course, and he was working he had a circle he was studying at, etc. And I opened the course, and the first line that I read was, sin is lack of love, like darkness is lack of light. And I thought, wow, that is brilliant. That's what I've always believed. The next sentence had the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and I tossed the book away. This is not for me. 2 years later, I was so depressed and so desperate that when I opened the course again, I didn't see any of the offending language. It had been completely translated for me because I was ready to read it differently. And where it said the Father or the Son or anything else, I read love, 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 love. And I read the breathtaking information that whatever you think you've done had no impact on who you truly are. And that I couldn't believe, because I had done so many nasty, horrible, and stupid things that were self-destructive to the extreme and destructive to others, that I could not imagine that actually, in truth, none of these would have lasting consequences. Now, in the illusion, they do. If I steal, there's a consequence. I'll be taken to court, and there'll be a punishment for that. That's in the illusion. But I'm talking about.
What do you mean in the illusion? What does that mean?
In the illusion is in the world that I think I live in. So the world that I think I live in is a construct that my ego made up. So everybody that's going to listen to this will have heard the line, it's not your task to change the world. Your task is to change your mind about the world. That's literally what it is. Mm-hmm. So it's not a matter of changing me. It's a matter of changing my mind about who I think I am. And once I recognized that who I thought I was a disaster, that I knew, but that was not who I was, that became incredibly exciting. Because then I thought, well, if that is true, and I'm only 50, I probably have another 10, 15 years of a decent life. And so I went to work absolutely fanatically, just like I drank fanatically. I played sports fanatically.
Good personality.
Apparently, we just had a conversation with the staff about that. They asked me, how come you do everything all out? Whatever it is, you do it all out. He said, I don't know where that comes from, but it's absolutely true. And thank God I did.
Yeah.
Because now, of course, in my work, and I'm at the center right now in Costa Rica, I come across people that, they want to do the work, but I hear and I see and I feel a 70% commitment or an 80% commitment. And I know for a fact, if you want to be a world-class athlete, and you have a 70% commitment, you might as well forget it and go have a burger, because nothing will happen. And if I want to really heal my mind, it has to be 100% commitment. There can't be anything else I want. Yeah. So there came a point where I was absolutely clear, without any question, the one thing I wanted was peace. I want peace. I want peace. It's the only thing I want. How do we go about getting that? And that's our work. That's what we do. That's what Choose Again is all about. It's what I'm all about for myself and for whoever is brave enough to come and subject themselves to our healing. Because it's not an easy place. It's not a place where you get coddled. It's not a place where you get sympathy. It's not a place where we say, oh my God, did that happen? Isn't that awful? How could that happen to you? No. when you come to our place, we listen to your story once,
Yes. I remember
once,
you saying
once,
that before. Yeah.
once, and then we're going to say, who would you be without your story? What would it cost you to recognize that whatever you just want to tell me, it has no basis in fact, but it has a very strong base in the story. And who would I be without my story? So over and over and over again, it became clear to me that if I kept telling my story, and the crazy thing is, it took me probably till I was 51 or 52 that I began to see that the 3.5 years in concentration camps had an incredible impact on me. Because in my home environment, nobody even talked about it. That's what happened. We were in camps for 3.5 years. 35% of all the people in the camps died. That's what happened. Nobody talked about it. So there was never, in my mind, I never saw an opportunity to explore the depth of the impact of that period of time. And that is what I've been working on for the last 30 years, to really get a clear picture of what did I make up in that time. And it's so interesting. I don't know if I talked to you last year, but last year in January, I was here and something happened. There was a set of circumstances and I completely lost it. I just went ballistically furious. And I said, holy shit, that is a remnant of absolute survival fear that I wasn't even aware of. So in my mind, at that moment, my very survival was threatened. Brilliant. I was so grateful for it because any time anybody can trigger me or get me upset, I said, wow, thank you. Wow, this is incredible. I didn't know you could get to me, but you did. What does that mean? You got to one of my core beliefs. And so at that moment, one of my core beliefs is that I'm not going to survive unless I'm in control. And although it's the absolute authority issue, which the Course talks about quite a bit, was triggered. And it gave me the opportunity to say, no, I don't have to be in control. And deeper still, that may be a little too far for this particular workshop, I don't have to survive either. My physical survival is completely irrelevant. Now, since in the last 6 years or 7 years, I've had a lung cancer, which was diagnosed, I think, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I can't remember. Anyway, we sat, my wife and I sat in the doctor's office, and he said, I've got some really, really bad news. We just got your CT scan back, and it looks like very much like a tumor on your left lobe. It's not very large, it's very small at this point, so there's a good chance we can stop it, but we're going to have to do something about it. And I said, yeah, I know what we have to do about it. I have to change my diet. And he said, no, you don't understand. I gave you a death sentence. And your reaction is, I have to change my diet? Why was that? Because I wasn't affected at all. During the 9 months that it took Stacy and I to heal the cancer, which we did together, I was not afraid for my life one split second. I was completely at peace. I was completely actually overjoyed. We laughed and laughed and laughed, and I would say that use the famous line from Midnight Cowboy where Dustin Hoffman says, I'm walking here. I would be saying, I'm dying here. So we did nothing but make fun of it and make light of it. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything. My life does not mean anything. What has meaning is the essence of my being. And the essence of my being is not affected by cancer or camps or divorce or alcohol. None of it affects it. And that was the great gift from the lung cancer. The Stace had a little harder time. There were times that she thought I wouldn't wake up because I was really sick as a dog. I mean, I stayed in bed for 14, 15 hours and barely moved. But the opportunity to really, really, really get down to I'm not a body. And we know how many times does the Course repeat that? I'm not a body, I'm free, I am as God created me. A beautiful sequence of words. But to actually get the opportunity to live it and to say, holy shit, it's true. The idea that my body could die within a few months It's true. So what happened in our case, we were sitting in the oncologist's office a week before he had proposed to remove my left lobe, which I think is more than a third of my lung capacity, and I wasn't keen on that. And we sat there, and he showed us once again the wonderful pictures of the situation, which in a scan looks sort of like looking down at a city at night from 36,000 feet. And there's all this lit up stuff and very exciting stuff. Anyway, I looked at Stacey and she looked at me and I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not taking it long out. And then I went home and I called 5 of my friends who are doctors. 2 in the States, 1 in Switzerland, 1 in Holland, and 2 in Vancouver. And I said, what do you think? And they all said exactly the same. I said, you're free to try to heal it. And the chances are pretty good that by September you'll be dead. So it's not, lung cancer is not something you mess with, they said. It has to come out, they said. And I said, no, it's not coming out. So we go ahead and we do, we research, come up with the most incredibly rigid diet that is sort of a compilation of all the diets we read about on YouTube and Google that people have used to heal cancers. And then one night, I'm going to tell you did I ever tell you my woo-woo story? You're about to get it. Anyway, so one morning I woke up and my body felt normal. I felt I had strength. I could make a fist, which I hadn't been able to do for 6 months. I could stretch, which I hadn't been able to do. I felt normal. I felt like all my energy had come back. And I turned to Stacey and said, something was healed during the night. I feel absolutely amazing. And she said, oh, isn't that fantastic? Isn't that wonderful? But why did you turn all the lights on? And I hadn't. But I'd also seen an incredibly bright light during the night in the bedroom. What is that? Who knows? The bottom line, a month later, there was not a trace of the tumor. A tiny little bit of scar tissue shows on the scan. Other than that, gone.
Oh, amazing.
It was absolutely fantastic. And of course, having let go of the body, in other words, having let go of the body, now I'm free to enjoy what this body can still do, which isn't very much, but it can still move and it can talk and it can play a little golf once in a while. It's still functioning somewhat. And it's fun. I have an absolutely fantastic life.
And, obviously I know that recently you had COVID. So how did you have any fear or any thought about, I've had lung cancer and COVID is a respiratory virus, anything?
No,
nothing.
Absolutely none. Absolutely none, zero. No, because fear gives me an evidence for something that is simply not true. I mean, you know the acronym, false evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. Fear is also a misinterpretation. Fear like trauma. Like we just finished the 10-day trauma workshop, which was absolutely wonderful. People went incredibly deep. But the premise of the trauma workshop is that trauma is nothing other than an interpretation of an event that happened a long time ago that I'm still suffering from. What am I suffering from? I'm suffering from my interpretation, not from what happened. So for me, you asked me at one point to talk a little, or to send you a list of most impactful lessons, I think, in the course.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether I mentioned this lesson, but it's 11:12, paragraph 5. And in that paragraph, the lesson talks about...
on your list, by the way.
Sorry?
That one wasn't on your list.
No, I didn't think it was. It is now.
Yeah.
That lesson talks about why would a meaningless world upset you? And then it says in paragraph 5, if the world is meaningless, why meaningless means it's neither good nor bad. And then I add what Nagarjuna says, it's neither good nor not good, neither bad nor not bad. And then why then should a meaningless world upset you? And I don't know it verbatim. I could try to do it verbatim, but basically what it says is because it's meaningless, The ego rushes in to give it meaning. That's what I'm suffering from. That is what's actually meaningless in truth. But if I train my mind to step back, in other words, the decision maker becomes the adult, and I step back and I said, let me ask my loving self. Some people call it the Holy Spirit, some people call it the loving self, but some people call it the Buddha mind. It doesn't matter what you call it. Ask my loving self, what does this mean? What meaning does this have? And then I always get a loving response. I always get a response that shows me what the deeper meaning is and what the gift is in whatever happens. So whatever I've given meaning in my life, I have to be willing and committed to questioning it. Because if the meaning I gave it was true, clearly I'd be gloriously happy. So if I'm not happy, then I know I've given a meaning it doesn't have. What meaning did I give it? Who's the I that chose that meaning? We're back to the story. That's the story I. That's the I that has this long victim story. We have 7 billion victims on the planet. Everybody is addicted to victim. You did this to me. They did this to me. This happened to me. And to really get at the deepest level, but nothing ever happens to you, that you get to that really, let's say, difficult sentence from the Course that says, everything that seems to happen to me, I have asked for and received as I have asked. I can tell you, people explode at that sentence. I didn't.
Who's the I though that is referred to in that sentence? It's not the individual, the seemingly separate self.
Not the ego self. No, it wouldn't understand that. So I'm glad you asked that question. So then we get to the model that we work with, which is that the mind has 3 parts. It doesn't, but we work with it like that. And the first part is the ego, and the ego made up all these beliefs, and the ego is sustained by the beliefs, and the ego makes up the story. The second part is the loving, capital S self, that waits on welcome. Never interferes, never says to the ego, oh my God, you're crazy. It never does anything like that. It just waits. The third part is what we call the decision maker. The decision maker has to become an adult. Because the decision maker hears what the ego says all day long. And it's going to have to learn to say, oh, yeah, I got that information, but you know, I'm 80. I've had that information for 78 years. I'm going to ask my loving self, is that true? The opinion, the judgment, the point of view that I just received from my ego, is there any validity in that? And the answer is always, oh, honey, you're not. It's a mistaken idea. You made the wrong interpretation. Choose again. And by choosing again, which is why we call choose again, what we mean by that is you have another opportunity. Let me look at this differently. Is there another way of seeing this? And of course, in a circle, for example, when you have 12, 14 people in a circle, and somebody has a very strong story and they really believe that this happened, and really that's what it is. And then we ask the whole circle, is there another way of seeing it? And then you get 12, 13, 14 different ways of seeing it. And then you ask that person who was the original, did any of these strike a chord with you? And of course, they're different from what he thought or she thought originally. And then they say, yeah, that's brilliant. For example, I'll give an example of my own life. When I was 4, just after the camp, I got really ill and I was put in isolation for almost 2 months. And isolation was absolutely horrible. I hated it. I felt unspeakably lonely. And I blamed my parents subconsciously. Not consciously, because I'm too young to do that, but at the deepest level, I thought they did this to me. And then you ask, is there another way of seeing it? Yeah, your parents would try to heal you. You were very ill. You had to be in the hospital. They did the loving thing. I said, wow, that's a different way of seeing it. And you can apply that to everything. And the Course gives you a foolproof tool. And that is that Forget about judging, because you cannot judge. You have no way of judging. There's one judgment you're allowed to make, and that is what I just experienced a cry for love or an extension of love? Those are the options. So when I look back at a torture scene that I remember from the camp where a naked woman was being beaten by barbed wire, was that a cry for love or an extension of love? And do you see, the whole horror has gone out of that picture, because the horror is my ego. It's a bit of a stretch to say this is a meaningless event and who is going to give it meaning? But the loving self would give it meaning. And that meaning would be very different. And that meaning would lead to a very different story. I can tell you, for the longest time, when I saw authority, people in authority, abusing their authority and being physically abusive, think back to Rodney King, for example. When Rodney King played, I threw up. These things affected me enormously, and it's obvious where that comes from. And of course, I'm going to work on that. And then about 18, 20 years ago, I was watching a show on TV, and it played in Africa. It was a beautiful scene of a white couple sitting on a veranda having tea. Absolutely idyllic, but way in the background, out of focus, you see a white man beating a little black boy with a stick. And amazingly, rather than being revolted and throwing up, I felt overwhelming love for the white man. Why was that? Because I suddenly understood in how much pain that man had to be to do this, and how much suffering he was doing. The suffering of the boy is different. We could talk about that. By the way, he beaten to death, so that really didn't matter anymore. But what did matter was, who's the I that would beat a little boy? That I is crying for love in a way that we have to respond to, but we don't. We punish that I. We put that I in jail, or we execute that I, instead of saying, wow, what a cry for love.
Yeah, it's like Jesus saying from the cross, isn't it? Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is such a. I'm so glad you brought that up, because from my point of view, that has been misinterpreted in a really unfortunate way. The way it's been interpreted as these people are killing the Son of God, they're torturing the King of the Jews. It's a really nasty thing they're doing. But that's not what he meant.
No, not at all.
What he meant is, I'm not a body. They think they're hurting me. They think they're killing me. They think they're doing something absolutely terrible. They're going to feel like shit for 2,000 years at least. But I can't be hurt. That was the message. And that message, fortunately, is made beautifully clear in the Course. There's a section of a short couple of lines in the Course that deals with that directly, that says, teach him, in this case, teach them, that whatever they're trying to do to you, your perfect freedom from the belief that you can be harmed shows them that they're guiltless. That was the message. Yes. And when I got that, I felt so much love for my father. I mean, he was physically violent. He had a bad temper. Both he and my mother did not come through the camps without serious damage, emotional, psychological damage. But when I read that line, and I read that I had never been hurt, physically, of course, I was hurt, but never the essence of it. And at that moment, I could see my father's cry for love, rather than saying he was a bully, he did all these horrible things, and I'm so glad I don't have to live with me. That was not the issue anymore. I felt nothing but love. Incredibly powerful teaching. Teach him whatever he may try to do to you, your perfect freedom from the belief that you can be harmed shows him that he's guiltless. Wow. Yeah. That's rich.
It certainly is. Yeah. Yeah. So well, there's two things I want to ask you. Firstly, how is it that some people come to this healing journey and other people don't?
It's a brilliant question. I can't answer it. In my case, it's obvious, and I will say that in any circle, any workshop, I'm incredibly grateful that my self-hatred was at a suicidal level.
Mm-hmm.
That became my motivation. If you're not at a suicidal level, if healing is not the only thing you can do or die, then motivation is different. So when I ask people, put a number on your life from 1 to 10, it's almost always a 7. Now we know it's not a 7, we know it's a -20, but that's how they feel. I'm at a 7, I'm doing okay. Well, where's the motivation?
Mm-hmm.
That's okay, we're okay. My wife and I, we get along. We sometimes fight. Sometimes I don't really want to see her, but that's how marriages are. No. As the Course says, you must become increasingly intolerant of mind wandering. And the mind wandering is what causes all the suffering. So what is the motivation? The motivation is to get a glimmer of what life could be like. And if you don't get that glimmer, and from my point of view, everybody's had that glimmer. But if you forget that glimmer, if it doesn't come to mind, if you don't remember that there is such a thing as total joy, real joy, not joy that depends on something outside of you or someone outside of you, inner joy. The real thing, exactly. Then if that doesn't happen, then I don't know what would motivate you. So when we do a trauma workshop, which we did a couple last year, we're doing a few more this year again, those people are motivated, every one of them. Mm. When you do a relationship workshop, it depends on how often they've talked to their divorce lawyer. If you're on the phone to your divorce lawyer and you recognize this is going to destroy my house, this is going to try to destroy my kids, it's going to destroy everything I've done, that's pretty good motivation. If you're not at that level and you're just sort of irritated with each other on occasion, then all your friends will tell you that's how it is, that's marriage. No marriage is joyful all the time. And I say, bullshit, why not? Why not? Because it is my choice. My joy does not depend on Stacy. Stacy's joy does not depend on me. That is an absolutely lethal trap that couples fall into. And of course, because it isn't absolutely clear at that point when it talks about a holy relationship, where it says both give errors gladly up for correction, what most people read, you have to give him up and I have to give him up and we have to do it together. Yeah, but you didn't do it yesterday, so I'm not going to do it today.
Yeah.
That will punish you. What the Course actually says, both give their errors up gladly for correction. It doesn't say to each other. So in a loving marriage, in a relationship that is healed and designed exclusively for healing, which eventually leads to actually loving each other, what a surprise. In that relationship, that's what I call a holy relationship, I'm only committed to my work. Stacy doesn't have to do anything. My partner does not have to do any processing ever. My job is to keep being present. And if she is miserable or appears to be upset, I check back in. How does that feel for me? That's my mother. My mother was depressed. My mother was upset a lot. My guilt comes up. It's my fault. My mother was upset. It's not my fault that my partner's upset. Thank God that's not true. She chooses her experience. My mother chose her experience. And that leads to a relationship free of all codependency. My happiness does not depend on my partner, or vice versa. Thank God.
Sometimes I hear people say things like, they understand. So let's backtrack a second. So again, in case people are not familiar with your work, say a bit about the Choose Again process Obviously, your book is called Choose Again, the centre is called Choose Again, and it's a 6-step process. So just give us a bit of that before I ask my next question.
Yeah. So the process we use, as you just mentioned, Susan, we call it the 6-step process. And it starts with step 1. And step 1 is, I'm upset. Do you hear anything else? No. You only hear, I'm upset.
No, because.
Brilliant. That's what I wanted to get across. So most people, I would say 99.999% of the people, when you say how you're feeling, they'll say, I'm upset because. And then comes the story. Who would you be without your story? So we don't do that. We don't do story. And even it happened virtually every day here in the last week that we were in the middle of the workshop. Even more trained people will still say, I'm upset because. And at one time, we had a wonderful staff member here who was fanatically disciplined in never saying anything about because. She would come to the service, she'd say, I'm upset. And then 13 or 14 people would think, did I do something? Was it my fault? Because that's how the ego works. So without the story, you don't know what happened. And the egos go crazy. God, did I do it again? Did I upset her? Fantastic. Step 2 says, this is about me. This has nothing to do with my partner, with my children, with the government, with the war in Ukraine, with inflation, whatever my ego comes up with. The upset has nothing to do with anything outside of me. That is the step people try to get around to all the time, because it's an absolute step. And it eliminates the story. At that point, you can't even think of bringing a story in because it would go against step 1 and step 2. Step 1 and step 2 eliminate your opportunity, your ego's opportunity to bring the case to court and defend it. The court has said not admissible. Not admissible. So then you go to step 3. And step 3 is, what am I feeling right now? So Susan said something a little bit derogatory to me. At least that was my perception, and I'm upset. Step 1, I'm upset. Step 2 is about me, not about Susan. Oh, good. I forgot about that for a minute. Step 3, what am I feeling? I'm feeling annoyed. I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling abandoned. I'm feeling rejected. I'm feeling judged. I'm feeling unsafe. A whole bunch of feelings came up when you made that comment. Which is the strongest? I think the rejected is the strongest. So I'm going to go to that. Then you ask yourself, is that a familiar feeling? And the answer is, of course, it is, because we don't make new feelings. Yes, it is familiar. And how big is it? Right now it's up at an 8. It's pretty big. Then you ask yourself to let that feeling walk you back to a memory when you were little, an earlier memory. Don't get hung up on it has to be in utero on the first day you were born. It could be 2 months ago, but it's as early as you can remember. That feeling will take you back. That feeling of being rejected. Wow, I remember. And I remember immediately the incident. And why do I remember it? Because I couldn't remember if you asked me before. I remember because the feeling takes me there. The feeling is absolutely essential. And people that skim our work and sort of look at it quickly say, well, you're just denying your feelings. No, I never deny a feeling. I don't validate it, but I never deny it. Because if I don't feel, I can't heal. It's that simple. So I have to go back to a memory where the first time I had that same experience of feeling that I'm lesser than. Wow, I remember that. And then I do my forgiveness, because at that moment, I made up that I wasn't good enough, that I was lovable. And in my case, I have a whole bunch of others that I had to work on and be in the process of healing. But then the healing process, which is step 4, is forgive me for believing. That's step 5. The first step 4 is, what did I make up? I made up that I'm lovable. I deserve to be rejected. Step 5 is, forgive me for believing that I deserve to be rejected. For example, forgive me for believing that when my dad beat me, it meant that I was a horrible little person. No, it didn't. Thank God that is not true. That's the forgiveness. That's a misinterpretation. You made that up. Your father beating you, whether you like it or not, was a meaningless event. But you gave it a meaning. And the meaning I gave it became a reflection of who I think I am. And that was wrong. So basically, my experience on the planet is the foundation of my experience on the planet is misinterpreted events. How much fun can that be?
None.
And the last step, not a lot. And then the last step is the final forgiveness, which is forgive me for forgetting. Forgive me for forgetting that I am loved. Forgive me for forgetting that whatever Susan thinks of me has nothing to do with me. Forgive me for forgetting that I'm unchangeably innocent. Forgive me for forgetting that the truth of me is the same as the truth of you. It's the same as the truth of the Buddha mind or the Christ mind. And then you check back in. Close your eyes, you go back in and say, okay, Susan said something to you. How does that feel now? I don't even remember her saying it. But now you remind me, oh, I think it's quite amusing, actually. I wonder what's going on with Susan. In other words, at that moment, I've relinquished that belief. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that one process erases 80 years of beliefs. It won't do that. But it can. I'm not saying it won't. It could. And I'm saying, stick with it. Keep doing it. And I've had a number of beliefs that really don't ever play out anymore. I was pathologically jealous to the point where when I was 48 or so, I decided I'm not going into any other relationship because it's hell. I'm constantly afraid of being betrayed. I'm constantly afraid of being abandoned. I'm constantly afraid of lied to. And of course, because I have those beliefs, those are the women I attract. I'm not doing it anymore till I'm healed. Well, I didn't keep my promise to myself and continue to attract people, women, that reflected my beliefs in order to heal them. So every relation, people say, well, how many marriages have you had? Well, in my definition, a 2-year committed relationship is a marriage. So I've had probably 4 or 5. And well, that's a lot of failure. It's failure. I've never failed in a relationship. Never. There is no failure in a relationship. I learned what I could in that relationship. I knew I wasn't done. In the last relationship before my current one, I came to a point of being completely at peace, regardless of what my partner said or did. That's when I knew it was time to move on. And then I attract someone who reflects still my beliefs, but they're at a completely different level. So we've had maybe 2 or 3 moments in 7.5 years that we said something even remotely unkind to each other. And that's because we've healed so many beliefs. Yeah. And that's the joy, that's the incredible. If I can think of a better motivation, I'll let you know. But if the motivation is, you can have joy that you cannot even imagine yet. You can have a life that's beyond your wildest dreams. The Course says it would make you unspeakably happy. Unspeakably happy. Wow, that's pretty happy. I'll sign up for that. What do I have to do to get that? I have to relinquish the self.
Yeah. So, 2 things I want to ask. So, firstly, in step 6, you said, forgive me for forgetting that I am love. Forgive me for forgetting that I'm unchangeably, whatever it was you said. What if you don't believe that? Yeah. What if you just don't believe?
Well, I love your question, as always. If you go back to the introduction from the Course, it says you don't have to believe it. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to welcome it. But you're applying it, and practically it will show it to you that's true. And that's what I go by. Who says I believe in oneness? Only an insane person would say that, because the I that believes in oneness is outside of the oneness. So how could that be? I believe in love. No, you couldn't believe in love. You can be love, but believing in it is an impossibility. So the belief really is not that relevant, but the practice is, the experience of it is. And the experience will come really quickly. And people report that as soon as their level of commitment to their process, and they start doing a 6-step process 5, 10, 20, 30 times a day, their life shifts dramatically, really quickly. But as the Course says, you say you want to be happy, you say you want to have joy in your life, and you don't have it now because your mind is totally undisciplined. Be honest about that. Sometimes I ask a client that I work with, how many times did you process yesterday? Well, yesterday I didn't have time. When did you last process? Oh, that was Tuesday last week. Wow, that's what I call an undisciplined mind. Now, I may be wrong, so my next question then will be, so that means you were unspeakably happy between last Tuesday and today. And I said, no, there were many upsets. Fantastic, those upsets are your Christmas presents. Open them, use them. Don't walk away from them. Don't say, I don't want to deal with that right now, or I don't have time. You always have time. How do I know that? Because that's what time was invented for. That's the purpose of time. It's for me to return to the timeless.
Yeah, I love that. If to put those two things together, if I'm not unspeakably happy, then I'm upset.
Right. Yeah. I presented it to the group in a slightly different way this week by saying, if I'm not happy, unspeakably happy, I'm wrong.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before. Yeah,
it's that simple.
Yeah.
No, I'm not wrong. I have a reason to do
it. I'm upset because.
Here it is. I'll let you know. And then the problem with that, of course, if we were to allow that, and maybe in the next workshop I'll do an experiment and allow it, see how many people I've taken in. Because people come to a center sometimes with incredible stories. And the ego that wants to collude, in other words, that wants to join in the suffering, which is diametrically opposed to what true empathy teaches, those egos will be glued to the lips of the person telling the story. Because that means their story has validity too. We're both victims. That's, you and I understand, we're best friends.
We call that compassion, Diederik, don't we?
We do.
I will listen to your story and I'll say, oh, that's terrible. And you'll listen to mine and we'll be so compassionate and loving to each other.
Yep. Well, that's because you're my friend, Susan. You understand me. While a real friend would say, okay, enough of that. Tell me how you're feeling.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? What is that feeling telling you about you? Let's do a shortcut. What is that feeling telling you about you? Well, it's not about it, but if it were about you, what's that feeling telling you about you? Well, then I'm unworthy. I have no value. Right. Is that a familiar feeling? Well, yeah, I feel that all the time, but it has nothing to do with it. Just let's stay with it. Is that true? Is it true that you have no value? And the crazy thing about that particular statement is that it is true. The I that wants to have value, which is the ego, has no value. And that's the I that's speaking. That's the I that wants to be validated. I just want to be seen. How many times have we heard that? I just want to be seen. Who's the one that has to see me? That's you. No one has to see me. No one has to love me. No one, particularly no one has to respect me. It's always about step 2. This is about me.
Yeah. So, final question. You've referred a number of times to the essence of myself, the essence of self.
Mhm.
What are you talking about?
The essence of my being is love. And that is one of the attitudinal healing principles. It's the first of the attitudinal healing principles that Jerry Jampolsky gave to the world. The essence of my being is love. So who I am in truth is as God created me. Well, as we learned in the very first part of the course, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, and therein lies the peace of God. That means that the self that I think I am was not created by God, because that self is constantly under threat, is constantly being threatened with extinction. So that means there must be an essence within me that fits that definition of therein lies the peace of God. So within me lies the peace of God, the part of me that's unchangeable. That is the peace of God. And again, for people that have difficulty with the word God, God bless you. We can work with that really quickly. It doesn't mean anything. You've given it the meaning it has for you. If you're upset, you've given it the wrong meaning. It just means love. And love, as described by the Course, is abstract, formless, infinite. Well, there goes my personality. So to hear that you have no personality, that you have no character, and that you actually can strip all of that stuff away and end up with only the essence of your being, and then come back and then start using your talents, which are originally ego-based, of course, but now you can use them purely for love and purely for healing, instead of for constant self-attack. Because we are attacking ourselves mercilessly all day long. It's one of the greatest lines from the Course, that the secret of salvation is about this: you are doing this to yourself.
Yeah.
Not a fun line, but
No.
fantastic.
Well, from which perspective, an initial reaction can be, no, I'm not. It's them. But actually, fully understood, what freedom.
Mm-hmm.
No one else is doing it. I'm doing it.
Yeah, and there's so many places that the Courses gives me that opening. For example, it's my thoughts alone that cause me pain. Wow, it's my thoughts alone that cause me. What are you talking about? I was sexually abused for 10 years by my father, by my uncles, by my brother. It's my thoughts alone. That's what causes me pain. Yeah. No, it doesn't. It's your interpretation.
As you said before, that was 10 years ago, and it's the thought that is now.
Exactly. And even 10 years ago, you made an interpretation that was wrong, and society did. We just recently, in the last workshop, we had a young woman who had been sexually abused. And I worked with her to see at what point by her brother, and it wasn't vicious rape, it was what boys and girls do when they're very young. So it's called sexually abused, and it can be whatever it was. And I asked her, at what point did that become an issue for you? And it had nothing to do with when it happened, because when it happened, it was natural. It was a 4-year-old girl with a 6-year-old boy exploring each other's genitals. But when the adults got involved, and when society started telling them how evil that is, and how disgusting and how horrific, and how the boy has a problem and should be sent to some whatever we can send them to, and you need to be nurtured from now on. No, that's an interpretation. What happened was meaningless. Ask my loving self, what do you think of what happened? And I said, oh, you were just a little girl. You were just a little boy. That's all it was. Now, in cases where there's a vicious rape, for example, with violence, it's still an interpretation. What did it say about you that this man or this woman chose to do that to you? Well, it must mean that I'm absolutely horrible, that I'm the worst of the worst, otherwise it wouldn't have happened. That's my interpretation. It's not true. It happened, so that, and since it happened, I now have the opportunity to see who I am in that setting. Who's the I that's being raped, is being beaten, is being abused? Forgive them for they don't know what they do. And it's the same with the cancer. Who is the I that had cancer? Not me. The body did. Unfortunately, we have Ramana Maharshi, we have Punja, we have Nisargadatta from the last century who all had lung cancer and all died. And they all said, body is cancer. Nothing to do with me. That's freedom.
It is, and it's available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you so much, Diederik. And I hope that the people who are listening will come and join us on February the 13th. There'll be information about that in the show notes for this podcast. And presumably in that workshop, people can ask, bring their upsets, and you will process with them. And
yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, because ideally they use this little part to get to an idea of who we are, what we do together, and then use the time together for a question and answer. So they can bring real issues that we can work with together and get some real transformation and a real experience of what forgiveness actually is. Because forgiveness is, of course, the most exciting thing there is.
Yeah.
It leads to my definition of love, which is joyful surrender to what is.
Joyful surrender to what is.
No matter what it is.
Yeah. That is freedom. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Diederik. Thank
you.
Lovely to talk to you again.
We'll do some more playing later on. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.